So PadSplit, multi-part question. How many rooms can you add on a property, or how many rooms should you add? Self-managing, should you self-manage versus leverage like a platform like PadSplit? And just to provide some context, like PadSplit is the equivalent of what Airbnb is for short-term rentals, a listing platform, how you collect income, how you communicate with your guests, all that stuff. What that resource is for short-term rentals, what Airbnb is for short-term rentals, is what PadSplit is for rent by the room. It's the biggest and best platform for renting your properties out by the room to others, and for people looking for room rentals, like the platform for them to find rentals on there. And then reserves. So how much money do I set aside for reserves for my PadSplit properties? So let's start with how many rooms to add, or can you add? So, I mean, I think, the assumption is we're all logical. So there's a physical limitation into how many bedrooms you can add to a property based on the square footage. The most common route, like usually every part of a house, every part of the square footage is already built out. It's just maybe you can convert certain rooms into bedrooms, because in my opinion, the main common area you need, it's really the main common area that you need for a property is the kitchen. You want to have a common area, a kitchen for your property. Maybe you have some outdoor space, but you do not need living rooms and dining rooms and things like that, extra offices. Everyone is going to be basically in their rooms, and then maybe leveraging the common area in the kitchen, for example. Converting, like the most logical way to add rooms to a property for rent by the room is to convert living rooms, dining rooms, and offices to bedrooms, right? That's easy. You add one or two non-load bearing walls, a door, a closet. It's a very easy conversion, very cost-effective conversion. I would add as many of those that you have available to, I would convert those. The biggest limiting factor is going to be the square footage on the property. But if you already have those rooms available and they flow well to be able, like sometimes you're going to have a living room and you have to walk through the living room to get to the kitchen or to other parts of the house. So you may not be able to convert that space. So you have to understand like what is actually feasible. It's not just the square footage, but what is actually feasible. And the best thing to do, what I primarily do, is I convert either a really large bedroom into maybe two, or what I definitely am doing is converting living rooms, dining rooms, and offices into bedrooms. So how many should you add? Well, the recommended guidance on PadSplit, the maximum bedroom to bathroom, that's another limitation. You really don't want more than 4 bedrooms sharing 1 bathroom. It becomes not sustainable for your residents. Imagine sharing your bathroom with 3 other people. It's going to be very tough. So I like to see a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 ratio. I mean, 4-to-1 is max. I'd see maybe a 3-to-1 ratio for my bedrooms. So another limitation is bathrooms. So it's like the physical space is one part. The other one is how many bathrooms do you have in that property? That makes a big difference on how many bedrooms you can add. Another one is unfinished basements. Those are, it's going to cost more to finish a basement and to add bedrooms and bathrooms there. But those are kind of what I'm looking at when I'm determining how many rooms can I add to a property to maximize the rent by the room income. I'm looking at converting living rooms, dining rooms, offices, and then I'm making sure that my bed to bath ratio is within reason. Like I said, ideally 3-to-1, at most a 4-to-1 ratio of 4 bedrooms for 1 shared bathroom. Really, I like no more than 3 bedrooms to 1 shared bathroom. So those are 2 great ways to determine, or those are 2 things that I think about when I'm determining how many bedrooms can I add to a single family home or a property for the rent by the room model. So let's see. Next is self-managing versus PadSplit. So what that means is if you are utilizing, like I said, PadSplit is the equivalent of what Airbnb is for short-term rentals. That's what PadSplit is for rent by the room. In my opinion, well, it is easier to find rent by the room tenants than it is to find short-term rental tenants for your property. Like it's easier to list a property on a traditional marketing platform like Zillow, apartments.com, realtor.com, whatever, for rent by the room than it is. It'd be really hard to do that for like short-term rentals. So you really do need like an Airbnb, a Vrbo, booking.com. You really do need those to be able to find your short-term rental guests. You can have your own website and all that, but it's going to be very hard to have guests go and book through there unless you are spending a lot of time marketing that. So I guess it is not fully comparable in the sense that you can still rent out your property. You definitely could rent out your property by the room without PadSplit. I just choose not to do that. I prefer to leverage PadSplit for all of my rentals. There's very few that are not done through PadSplit, and that's because it was before I decided I was only going to be buying rent by the room in markets that are PadSplit markets already. These are markets that were not yet PadSplit, or they're upcoming, or, they're going to be PadSplit markets, but they aren't yet. So we just did it and rented it out on our own. But I think the cost of PadSplit, paying PadSplit the percentage of rental income, far outweighs the extra work needed to find tenants to rent by the room, right? That's one of the big things people are literally looking on the PadSplit website to find rent by the room properties. So you could even do that on Furnish Finder or Airbnb or Zillow, whatever. You can rent it and find guests that way. But this is a platform dedicated specifically to rent by the room. That's one advantage. Secondarily, then I don't have to set up individual leases, individual payment plans, like individual rent collection process. I don't have to do any of that stuff or communicate with the guests, try to figure out how are we going to communicate? Is it going to be over text, over email? Like, how are we going to communicate, or use another third-party platform? All of that is done on the PadSplit platform. So what I'm leveraging the PadSplit platform for is finding my guests, communicating with them, collecting rental income. They're submitting maintenance requests, and I'm communicating with them, like I said, through that platform. Plus, there's a ton of other resources and benefits the more you work with PadSplit. I mean, honestly, even before I had my first property that was leveraged on PadSplit, I was still getting a lot of help from their team. If you are not yet on PadSplit, even if you don't have this, or you have not, maybe you don't have a single property, maybe you are not quite yet ready to rent it out. Maybe you do have one, but you're not ready to rent out by the room, or you haven't bought a property for rent by the room. Still use this link that I'm going to drop in the comment. Use this link. It is a referral link from me. The benefit of you doing this for you is when you use this link to sign up, you're going to work with my exact account rep, which is Blake Lewis, who I've been working with for over a year now, almost 2 years, I believe. And I've been working with her from the very beginning of every single property that I've ever bought. Blake has played every single property that I've ever bought for rent by the room or PadSplit. Blake has been part of that. She's been part of all those, helping me with deal analysis, determining market research, like whatever, market research and all that stuff. And they provide all these resources. Not only can you, like I said, find guests, collect rent, maintenance requests, communication, all that stuff on PadSplit, but they also have referrals to contractors. Maybe you don't know how to find a contractor to build these additional bedrooms, and like, oh, wait, now you recall, if these are multiple people living in this house, you're going to need individual locks for the bedrooms. You're going to need door numbers for the bedrooms, or like letters for the bedrooms. You're going to need certain things that are unique to a rent by the room property. Well, PadSplit has contractors they can refer to you in some of their bigger markets that they can refer to you. They have other connections in those markets that can benefit you. So leveraging them like as a resource for not only determining the markets you're going to invest in, for managing your market, managing your properties, and then even the rehab and all that. That's why I use PadSplit. It's so much more than just the benefit of their website, but it's all the referrals and resources they provide. Leveraging the link that I provide you will connect you directly with Blake Lewis, who has been a big part of my investing journey for my co-living or rent by the room properties. That's what that link will allow you to do, is book directly with her and leverage in. The cool thing about her, and this is something that I am very adamant about, I don't like to take advice from people who are not doing the thing that I want to be doing, especially at a higher level. The cool thing about Blake is she's actually an investor who also owns co-living. She's newer in that space as an investor, but I love to see that she's buying and holding real estate herself while also helping other people do the same. So that's another huge plus for Blake. So I dropped that link for you in the comments. So hopefully I explained, I prefer to self-manage, or I prefer to leverage PadSplit, but understanding that similar to short-term rental, PadSplit or Airbnb are providing you the guests, right? People can book through there, communicate through there, collect income. What they're not doing is you still need to pay for a cleaner and coordinate cleaning and maintenance requests and moving in, letting your tenants into the property and all that stuff. You got to still do the same thing for PadSplit or rent by the room. You still have to do that. So PadSplit is great for those components, like the upfront stuff, just like Airbnb is, but you still need property management on the back end. What I was previously doing was we were paying property management company to manage on the back end of what PadSplit was doing, right? They still had to complement the management that was done through PadSplit. And eventually I got to a point where we're paying $10,000+ of property management. It made more sense for me on that back end piece, still PadSplit, but that back end property management, moving tenants in and all that kind of stuff. That back end piece, well, once I was paying $12,000+ of property management every single month, I decided, no, it's better for me to hire a full-time asset manager, hire some staff to do guest communications and a lot of the communications that an asset manager doesn't need to focus on. And it saved me a bunch of money to do so. It's a lot cheaper than $12,000. And I'm able to provide a more consistent guest experience, more consistent management for like my bookkeeping and all that. But I only did that after a certain point of it. Make it like, I would recommend PadSplit plus property management until you have enough properties that then you can hire someone in-house to do a better service and be more cost effective. So that's kind of my logical progression of what I've done and what I would recommend you to do as well. But at the same time, you're still leveraging the PadSplit platform. You're just going from the second piece of management instead of outsourcing that, bringing it in-house, but that'll come with time. Like, it's not going to make a lot of sense to do that until you have several properties that you're already managing at one time. So hopefully that clarifies that. We talked about how many rooms to add and how I determine what rooms to add in the ratio of the bed to bath, and then self-managing versus PadSplit. So reserves percentage. So the question was essentially, when you are analyzing an investment property, what you're looking at to determine your cash flow, if you're doing it right, a lot of people who make mistakes when analyzing deals, they do income minus expenses, and that's what they're saying. So like income minus mortgage usually is what they're saying is their monthly cash flow, the profits that they're receiving. But the mortgage payment you're paying each month is actually the least amount of money you're paying each month for that property. What you're also going to have is additional expenses, right? You're going to have maybe you're covering utilities. If it's a rent by the room, you're definitely covering utilities, internet, landscaping, things like that. But also you should be setting aside money. You're paying property management. You need to set aside a percentage of your income for that. That's how property management gets paid unless it's a flat fee. They're getting a percentage of the income. And you're setting a percentage of the income is going towards vacancy because your property will not be 100% full forever. So you need to analyze that investment with the understanding that it will not be fully rented the entire time. So that's that, having that vacancy percentage. And then the third one will be your renovation or your capital expenditures and reserves for capital expenditures and maintenance. So roughly you set aside 10% of your income, of your monthly income, for capital expenditures, which tend to be like bigger repairs on your property, things that you know will happen, just maybe not quite, you don't know exactly when it'll happen, but you have a rough idea. You're gonna have to replace your roof every 20 to 30 years. Depending on the age of your roof, you'll have a rough idea of when you have to replace it. You're gonna have to replace your flooring. It could last you 5 years. It could last 2 years. It could last 10 years, depending on how well it's taken care of and what flooring you put in. You have to replace your appliances. That's where your capital expenditure is. Things on your property are deteriorating. They will need to get replaced. So you need to set aside money for that in advance. Otherwise, you might think that you're making, $5,000 a year in cash flow, but in reality, because you didn't set aside reserves, when you have to replace that roof and it costs you, $10,000, $15,000, well, that just wiped away the cash flow you thought you were generating because you were not actually setting aside this money that you knew was going to need to be spent. So it's very important to analyze your investments and make sure they're cash flowing even after you're setting aside money for those capital expenditures. And then same goes for maintenance. So CapEx and maintenance, roughly people save 10% of their income. It's like 5% and 5% roughly. And then your maintenance is more like, okay, I need to send a plumber out for a clogged sink, or I need to, so we got an outlet that's not working, just some basic maintenance stuff that you're sending someone out to make sure your property is operational. So the question is, what percentage are you setting aside for your properties in reserves then we'll just focus on the maintenance and CapEx piece. So that's a great question, because if you have a long-term rental and it's generating you, $2,000 of income, right? Not profit, but $2,000 of rental income each month, and you're setting aside 10%, that's $200. Well, if you have a PadSplit rent by the room that's generating you for the same house, but now it's generating you $5,000 of rent by the room income, 10% of that is $500, right? Same property, $200 a month if it's generating $2,000 of income, or $500 a month if it's generating $5,000 of income for the rent by the room. You'd say, is that really necessary? Do I really need to generate more than what I would be saving for a long-term rental? And that's a great question. You're just understand, for a PadSplit, you're going to have more people in there, right? Rent by the room, you have more people in there, maybe more wear and tear. People are going to be moving in and out more often. There's going to be more people using, the appliances and all these things. The roof is the same. All these things are the same, but you will have potentially more maintenance issues and more issues because the property is going to be utilized more. When I mention this to the super investors community, it's kind of hard to say. It's kind of arbitrary. I would make sure that your maintenance and CapEx, that 10%, is at least 10% of what you would be generating as a long-term rental. I would maybe do 15% of what you would generate as a long-term rental. You don't necessarily need to do 10% of the income of the rent by the room. That's kind of that is how it is on my investing calculator, but understand that there's some variability. If I'm setting aside like $500 a month or, $400 to $500 a month on a property, by the end of the year, it's $6,000, right? $500 times 12, that's $6,000 in reserves. That's a lot of money you're setting aside in reserves. What I tend to do is once I hit a certain amount of money in my reserves, so depending on the property value, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, once I hit that amount, I'm no longer setting aside money for reserves, right? Because it's like, I've got $20,000 for this property set aside for reserves. The rest is getting distributed to either just myself as the sole owner or with my partners who, if we own it together, and we're taking that excess as cash flow. But when you're analyzing it, you don't have to be like a hard and fast, they're going to do 10% of the rental income on the co-living, the much higher income. You could do 10% of the long-term rental, or in my opinion, maybe do like 15% of the long-term rental income. So that $10,000 or that $2,000 of long-term rental income, 10% of that is $200. Maybe you do 15% of that 2,000, which is $300, I believe. And that's like a good place. Or maybe you just cap a ceiling. Like, I will do 10% of the rent by the room until it's $500. And then after that point, I'm not going to set aside more than $500 a month. So if it's $6,000, even though 10% would be $600, you're still going to cap it at $500 of reserves. So what I'm trying to say is it's fairly arbitrary. Make sure it's not less than what your long-term rental reserves would have been in the first place, because the property is going to be utilized more than a traditional long-term rental, more than likely. So it's more than likely going to have more maintenance issues and more wear and tear on some of your flooring and your walls, and, for painting and for your appliances are going to be utilized potentially more because there's more people. So make sure the minimum that you're setting aside is the 10% for long-term rental income. I would put a wiggle room, maybe do 15, 20% of the long-term rental reserves. Or if you're going to do 10% of your rent by the room or short-term rental income, be like logical. You don't need to save $1,000 a month, for a property. If it generates $10,000 a month, I have one property that generates almost between $20,000 to $30,000 a month in rental income as a luxury short-term rental. I'm not setting aside $2,000 to $3,000 in reserves for that property. It's just excessive and unnecessary. It's just too much reserves for one property. That translates to tens of thousands of dollars a year just in reserves. You don't need to do that. You leverage some common sense and just understand that if like the higher end is 10% of this management strategy and the lower end is 10% of long-term rental, somewhere in between that feels right and makes the deal work for you and your partners is what you should go with. If you want a hard and fast rule, I'll just give you two arbitrary ones, do 10% of your long-term, 10% of your advanced management strategy, whether short-term, mid-term, or rent by the room, do 10% of that up to a cap of $500 a month. Or if it's, and have common sense on like, if your property's millions of dollars, you probably need more than a property that's $500,000 or $300,000, right? Have some common sense in that. There's no hard and fast rules. I'm trying to say that you can't, but if you're going to do one, let's do 10% of the advanced management strategy with a cap of $500, or maybe 15 to 20% of what the long-term rental income would be. Hopefully that helps some people out who want a specific number or whatever. At the end of the day, you're going to have to do what you're going to have to do when you're managing that property. If you need more money, you're going to need more money to put into reserves. And you'll have a good idea because every property is different. If your roof is completely brand new and the property's a new build or recently remodeled, it's going to be very different than a much more outdated property. But for some simple rules, I just gave you two for advanced management strategies in particular. If you're doing like PadSplit, short-term rental, mid-term rental, two different ways that you can do it, or you can do something in between.